So have you ever noticed how people, especially in today's society, can go from obscurity to extreme poverty, or not poverty, popularity, and then back down to either nothingness or even worse, like being hated, and that can all happen very quickly, right? You know, I've seen companies that were doing really well, and then all of a sudden somebody made a comment somewhere, a memo got out or whatever, and people decided that wasn't appropriate. And all of a sudden that company just sunk, right? And with the social media that we have today and kind of the attitude that we have today, where people are held to this standard that I think sometimes is a little unrealistic and a little, if we were to consider, if we were held to that same standard, we probably wouldn't be able to stand either, right? But sometimes that popularity can go quick and go up and down, and we see a little bit of that today in our reading for today from the Gospel of Luke with Jesus, one of possibly the fastest dips in popularity that we have in recorded history here. But this is from Luke chapter 4, verse 16. It says, "He went to Nazareth," this being Jesus, "where he had been brought up. And on the Sabbath day he went into the synagogue, as was his custom, and he stood up to read. And the scroll of the prophet Isaiah was handed to him. Unrolling it, he found the place where it is written, 'The Spirit of the Lord is on me, because he has anointed me to proclaim good news to the poor. He has sent me to proclaim freedom for the prisoners, and recovery of sight for the blind, to set the oppressed free, to proclaim the year of the Lord's favor.' Then he rolled up the scroll and gave it back to the attendant and sat down. The eyes of everyone in the synagogue were fastened on him. And he began by saying to them, 'Today this scripture is fulfilled in your hearing.' All spoke well of him, and they were amazed at the gracious words that came from his lips. 'Isn't this Joseph's son?' they asked. And Jesus said to them, 'Surely you will quote this proverb to me, "Physician, heal yourself." And you will tell me, do here in your hometown what we have heard you have done in Capernaum. Truly I tell you,' he continued, 'no prophet is accepted in his hometown. I assure you that there were many widows in Israel in Elijah's time, when the sky was shut for 3.5 years, and there was a severe famine throughout the land. Yet Elijah was not sent to any of them, but to a widow in Zarephath, in the region of Sidon. And there were many in Israel with leprosy in the time of Elisha the prophet, yet not one of them was cleansed, only Naaman the Syrian.' All the people of the synagogue were furious when they heard this. They got up and drove him out of town and took him to the brow of the hill on which the town was built in order to throw him off the cliff. But he walked right through the crowd and went on his way." So here you have Jesus. He's come home. He's back to Nazareth, right? This is where he grew up. And he goes to the synagogue, as he would normally do, and he was one of the readers that day. He got up and he read from the scroll of Isaiah. Right? And he reads this scroll, which is a messianic prophecy, and then he says what? He says, "Today, in your hearing, this has been fulfilled." In other words, that's me that it's talking about. And the people are like, "Wow, this is Jesus, that's Joseph's boy, right? Look at that, hometown boy. We might have the Messiah coming here from Nazareth. That's right." And I kind of have this image in my mind. I went to Georgia Southern University for my college years. And in South Georgia, you have all these little towns where football is everything. High school football is everything. And so you have these hometown heroes. I mean, these are places where literally the whole town shuts down on Friday night so everyone can go to the game, right? And you're the hometown football hero, and everyone's like, "Yeah, you're so great." I kind of have this image of Jesus, they're like, "Oh, that's one of ours. Look at all the things that he's going to be able to do. No one's going to be like, yeah, whatever, Nazareth. We're going to have a spot on the map now. We're going to have a little authority here. He's going to be able to do all this stuff," and you can tell that they were thinking about some of the things that he'd be able to do as he goes on and, he says, "Well, you're going to want me to do all the things that I've done in other places," and say, "Oh, come do them here too, come on." Right? And they were thinking about all the great things that they were going to get, or their town was going to get. But they were missing why the Messiah was coming. And they were missing why Jesus was here. He wasn't here to make Nazareth some awesome place and give them political power. He wasn't here to wow them and give them all these great little things like that. He was here to reconcile the world. Right? He was here to save them from their sins. So they have this different image, and he can't stand for that. He doesn't want that to persist. He wants to correct them. And so he kind of turns the tables on them, and he says, you're going to quote to me this proverb, physician, heal yourself. And you're going to want me to do all these great things. And they do. Right? When Jesus is hanging on the cross, they look at him and they say, he saved others. Can't you save yourself? Right? And then he reminds them of these two instances. Where he says, no prophet is accepted in his hometown. And he talks about the time of Elijah. And during the time of Elijah, as a result of the sin of Israel, God shut the skies. There was a great famine for 3.5 years, and people were running out of everything. And he sends Elijah to this widow. It's a widow and her son. And he goes to her, and they are down to the last of what they have. He walks up to her, and he says, can you make me something to eat? And she says, well, I was about to make some bread for my son and I. It's the last of what we have. We were going to eat it, and we figure we'll die after that. So we have no more food, and there's no more food to be had. He says, well, let me in. Make me some bread, and then make some for yourself. And God will provide. And he does. God continues to provide. Every morning they get up, and there's enough oil and enough flour for them to make more food. And he continues to provide. But what Jesus is saying is, look, that was someone in Zarephath, in Sidon. That wasn't one of your own. That wasn't hometown. And then he points to Naaman. Naaman was an enemy. And he was in Syria. He was like a general. He was a warrior of the enemy. And he had leprosy. And he's taken, he goes to Elisha to be healed, and he's healed. And Jesus reminds them, it's not like there was no one else in Israel that had leprosy at the time. But he was the one that was healed. And that set them off, didn't it? I've gotten upset at people before. I don't think I've ever gotten to the point where I wanted to drag them out of town and throw them off a cliff. But they go from, hometown hero, to throw them off the cliff in a matter of minutes or however long this confrontation took place. They had in their mind all these great things that would be able to come to them because the Messiah was coming out of their town. And that was exciting. And then when Jesus says, that's not what this is about, that upset them. They had in their minds this, what we would call a theology of glory. Like this idea that God's here to bring us glory. And that we are going to have all these great things, not just forgiveness and all the blessings that God promises us, but, all these wonderful things. We do this today still. We say, well, God's with me, then He's going to give me the money that I need. He's going to provide for the house. He's going to, the car, all these things. I'm not going to have to deal with sickness, right? If I have enough faith, and you've probably heard this said, if you just have enough faith, God will heal you. Right? And we have all these things where we say, okay, well now I'm one of the chosen ones. I'm one of God's children. Shouldn't I be getting all these wonderful things? And it's this theology of glory. I shouldn't even have to, I should be able to win over this sin, right? I shouldn't have to deal with this sin anymore but that's not really what we see. We don't see that in the scriptures. We don't see that in life. If we look at life, we still get sick. Right? We still have financial problems. We still struggle in our marriages sometimes. Sometimes our kids aren't perfect little angels. Not you, Kaylee. You're always perfect. But life still happens. And there's still difficulties. There's still suffering. And we can look at that, and if we have this in our mind, this theology of glory, then we say, well, what's going on here, God? And that can take us in some pretty scary places. Where we either start going, well, maybe I'm not really one of God's children. Maybe my faith isn't strong enough. Maybe God doesn't really love me. Because we've placed our expectations on things that God didn't actually promise. God gives us a very different image in the Scriptures. It's not one where all the suffering and all of the difficulties are removed from our lives if we would just have faith in Him. It's quite the opposite. In fact, in Matthew 16, Jesus is talking to His disciples, and this is what He says. It says, "From that time, Jesus began to show His disciples that He must go to Jerusalem and suffer many things from the elders and the chief priests and the scribes, and be killed." That sounds bad. That's some tough suffering. And be killed, and on the third day be raised. And Peter, not liking what he's hearing, that's not what's supposed to happen, so Peter takes him aside, and he begins to rebuke him. "Surely not. Far be it from you, Lord. This shall never happen to you." Right? This isn't what's supposed to happen to the Messiah. The Messiah isn't supposed to have to suffer. This isn't the way this is all supposed to work, God. And Jesus turns to him and he says, "Peter, get behind me, Satan. You are a hindrance to me, for you are not setting in your mind the things of God, but on the things of man." Now, that is a perfect definition of what the theology of glory is. It's setting our mind on the things of man rather than on the things of God. That we want this suffering to be removed. We want all these difficulties to be removed. We want life to be a perfect little walk through the park. But Jesus continues on. And he says that Jesus told his disciples, "If anyone would come after me, let him deny himself and take up his cross and follow me." This is a theology of the cross, which stands in contrast to a theology of glory. This is one where we look to the cross. We look to that suffering that Jesus went through. He didn't spare himself the suffering. He went to the suffering in order to save us. He went to that suffering. He suffered, and now he says, if you're going to follow me, guess what? It's going to be hard. You're going to be taking up your own cross as well. And he continues, he says, "For whoever would save his life will lose it. Whoever loses his life for my sake will find it. For what will it profit a man if he gains the whole world, but forfeits his soul? Or what shall a man give in return for his soul?" This is a hard teaching. And this is a difficult thing. Because it's not really what we expect. It flies in the face of what we want. We want God to remove all the suffering. We want that. And here Jesus says, no, actually, if you follow me, it's going to be really hard. When he's praying before he goes to the cross in John 17, he says, "The world has hated me, and so the world is going to hate you because you are in me." And God hasn't promised a life free from suffering. Rather, he has told us that it's going to be difficult. But Jesus doesn't leave us in the suffering. Right? He doesn't just abandon us to the suffering. He's there with us. He says that he will never leave us nor forsake us. And this isn't a God who doesn't know what it's like, right? He has gone through the suffering himself. He has suffered a lot of things. I mean, first he started by even just God becoming man and dealing with all of the things that humanity deals with, getting hungry and, it's all the life things. Right? And then he was never wealthy. It says that he had no money. It said that he had no place to lay his head. And of course, we know ultimately he would suffer and die for us. So this is not a God who looks on from his throne having never experienced suffering and says, man, that looks rough. But rather one who has been through suffering, quite frankly, suffering that's probably beyond what we can imagine. He doesn't promise to remove us from the suffering, but rather promises to be with us in that suffering. And it can be difficult. It was through his suffering that he saved us. And it was he who came for those who were suffering. He was the one who came for the poor. He came for the imprisoned, for the blind, for those who were being oppressed. He came for us. Because that's who we are. We are the ones who suffer. We suffer in a world that is fallen, a world that is corrupted by sin. That can be very difficult at times. But he came into that world of suffering himself so that we could be saved. And he stays with us then in that suffering while we go through suffering. And he gives us others to be with us, right? To encourage us and comfort us. And he sends us his Spirit which he has called the Comforter. We have that passage in our epistle reading from 2 Corinthians where it talked about how he sends his Spirit to encourage those who are suffering, encourage those who are persecuted. And that in that encouragement, they can encourage others. And even in their suffering, they can encourage others because they know what it's like. They've been there. And you can point to the Christ who has also been there. The one who went to the cross for us. So that ultimately, when he returns, he will remove the suffering. Right? This suffering is here in this fallen world because it's a fallen world, because we have sin in this world. But when Jesus returns, it says that he will bring us to be with him. There will be no more sin. There will be no more suffering. There will be no more death. There will be no more tears. Right? There's no more sickness. There's no more leg pains. That gets removed at that time. But now he is here with us even in our suffering. So we don't put our hope in whether we are healed or whether we get wealthy. We don't allow ourselves to get discouraged because we suffer. That's not a message that God isn't there with you. Rather, he says he is there. Sometimes the Naamans of the world get cured and the Christian stays afflicted. And that's hard. It's hard to look at that. But he says that he's there with us. That he's walking with us every step of the way. That he is comforting us. That he is strengthening us. That he is encouraging us. And he will not leave us. So in those times of suffering, we look to the words of the Messiah, to that anointed one, who came for the poor and the imprisoned and the blind and the oppressed. We look to his cross. We look to his suffering. We look to his promise to be with us in the suffering. Knowing that his grace is not determined by whether we are healed or not, but rather by his promise, by our forgiveness, by the freedom from sin that he has given us, by the freedom from the oppression of the devil and death that he has given us through his suffering on the cross. Amen.